Have you ever walked into a place, minding your own business, your heart filled with purpose, only to feel like the whole room is staring at you for the wrong reasons? That's how Danielle Moore felt on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just a quick stop at her local department store after work. Hair tied up, tired eyes from a long shift, wearing her work ID badge around her neck. A hard-working, proud black woman moving through life with grace. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to do something wrong before it turns against you. Danielle just needed to grab a few items. Some baby lotion for her niece, paper towels, and a scented candle for her mother's upcoming birthday. Nothing too expensive, nothing extravagant, just everyday things, everyday moments. But for Danielle, this day was about to become anything but ordinary. As she walked through the aisles, she felt it. That feeling, the weight of suspicious eyes, the sideways glances, the soft whispers. A security guard, standing by the electronics section, subtly followed her. She noticed. Her heart skipped a beat. She reminded herself to stay calm. It wasn't the first time, and sadly, deep down, she knew it probably wouldn't be the last. Still, she pressed on, pretending not to notice. Because what else was she supposed to do? She picked up what she needed and made her way to the checkout. She smiled at the cashier, trying to appear as normal as possible, even though her gut told her something was off. And then, just as she was about to pay, she felt a firm tap on her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you step aside for a moment?" A deep voice. Cold, unapologetic. She turned to find the store manager and the same security guard standing there. People began to stare. Phones came out. Her heart dropped. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "What's going on?" The manager replied flatly. "We've had a report of suspicious activity. We'll need to check your bag." Her bag? She hadn't even made it to the register yet. She hadn't stolen a thing. But to them, her presence alone was reason enough for suspicion. Danielle looked around, suddenly feeling like she was under a spotlight, her dignity slipping away with every passing second. She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat stopped her. "Please, come with us," the guard insisted. She complied, trying to stay composed. She kept her voice soft, trying not to cry. "I didn't take anything. I swear." But they weren't listening. Not really. They led her to a small office in the back, away from the eyes of the other shoppers, though she could already imagine the rumors swirling, the assumptions being made. Another black woman caught stealing. Another case for TikTok. Another moment of humiliation that people would forget by next week. But Danielle wouldn't forget. She sat down, feeling smaller than ever, as they began searching her bag. Item by item. They found nothing. Of course they didn't, because there was nothing to find. Still, no apology came. Only silence. That is, until someone remembered the security cameras. The room was silent. Danielle sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to stop them from shaking. Her mind was racing. How did a quick trip to the store end up like this? The manager stood by the door, avoiding eye contact. The security guard kept glancing at her like she was still guilty. But now there was tension in the air, not from Danielle, but from them, because the items in her purse had all been paid for. The receipt was untouched in her jacket pocket, and the footage was about to speak louder than any voice in the room. The security room was just down the hall, a small space filled with monitors showing every angle of the store. Shelves, aisles, checkouts, entrances, exits. It saw everything, including what had really happened. The guard disappeared into the room. His steps hurried. The manager followed closely behind, perhaps hoping the cameras would justify their actions. Perhaps hoping they'd find something to make their assumptions feel less shameful. Danielle, still in the back office, waited. She could hear the soft hum of the monitors, the clicking of buttons, the occasional whisper. And then a shift. Voices grew quieter. The air grew heavier. 5 minutes passed. 10. And then the manager re-entered the office, eyes cast down, lips tight. No one said anything at first. No apology. No explanation. Just that uncomfortable silence that fills the space when someone knows they were wrong, but doesn't have the courage to admit it. Danielle stood. "Did you see what you needed to see?" she asked, her voice now firm. The manager gave a half-hearted nod. There was nothing suspicious in the footage. Of course there wasn't, Danielle replied, her voice shaking with pain and restrained fury. Because I didn't do anything. A pause. We're sorry for the misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? That word hit her like a slap. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was profiling. It was humiliation. It was disrespect. But Danielle knew better than to argue with someone who wasn't willing to truly listen. She grabbed her purse and receipt, holding her head high. The tears that burned her eyes, she refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not in that room. As she walked out, the same shoppers who had watched her being escorted away now looked at her with confusion, or worse, indifference. The damage had already been done. What hurt the most wasn't just the false accusation. It was how easily they believed she was capable of theft just because of the way she looked. She passed the exit and, for a brief moment, glanced at one of the cameras overhead. A cold, blinking eye that had become her only witness. The only one who had seen the truth when others chose not to. The footage didn't just clear her name. It exposed a deeper truth, one that many people like her have lived with for far too long. That truth? Your innocence won't always protect you. Your smile won't always shield you. And your humanity? Too often, it's invisible to people who only see color. But that day, the camera didn't lie. It saw Danielle, not as a suspect, not as a stereotype, but as a woman simply shopping, simply existing, simply deserving of dignity. And while the footage couldn't erase what had been said and done, it gave her something else. Proof, power, and a voice that would not be silenced. Danielle stepped out into the parking lot, her breath shaky, her hands still trembling. The crisp afternoon air kissed her face, but it didn't cool the heat burning beneath her skin. The kind of fire that comes not from anger alone, but for being violated without touch, wounded without blood. She opened her car door slowly, slid into the driver's seat, and closed it behind her. And then she cried. Not quiet tears, not the ones that silently slip down cheeks like in the movies, but deep guttural sobs, the kind that come from the soul. Because when you're falsely accused, not just of a crime, but of being less than human, it wounds something that no apology, no camera footage, no polite "we're sorry for the misunderstanding" can repair. Her heart wasn't broken because someone thought she stole. Her heart was broken because someone looked at her skin, her hair, her presence, and saw a threat before they saw a person. Because someone felt entitled to stop her, humiliate her, interrogate her, without evidence, without reason, and without regret. And she was tired. Tired of holding her head up when her spirit was being crushed. Tired of pretending that grace was enough armor for the world's suspicion. Because Danielle wasn't just crying for herself. She was crying for her nieces, who would grow up in the same skin. She was crying for her father, who had stories of his own, of being followed in stores, of being called names, of being told to calm down when he was simply trying to speak the truth. She was crying for the countless black women before her, the ones history forgot, the ones whose dignity was stolen without consequence. And in that car, on that cold leather seat, Danielle wasn't just a victim. She was a vessel, carrying generations of pain, and still expected to stay silent. But silence, today, was no longer an option. She wiped her tears, took out her phone, and opened the camera. Not the security footage. Her footage. Her story. She spoke. Not for sympathy, not for attention, but for truth. "My name is Danielle," she said into the lens, her voice cracked but steady. "And I want you to know what just happened to me." She detailed the false accusation, the walk to the back room, the search, the tension, the humiliation, the silence when they realized they were wrong. And then, the most powerful words she said were the ones that didn't come with bitterness, but with clarity. "This isn't just about me. It's about what people believe when they look at women who look like me. And I'm tired of pretending like it's okay." She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't throw blame. She told the truth. And the moment she hit post, the moment she let the world in on her story, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just the woman who was falsely accused. She was the woman who stood in the truth, unshaken, unashamed. And while the camera in that store had cleared her name, the camera in her hand. That gave her control back. Danielle didn't expect her video to go viral. She had simply spoken her truth, raw, emotional, and unfiltered. But sometimes, the truth has a way of finding ears that have long been waiting to hear it. Within a few hours, the post began gaining traction. First, a few comments from friends. "We love you, Danielle. This is heartbreaking. I'm so sorry this happened." Then came strangers. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Black women from across the country shared her story with captions like, "This happened to me too. We are with you." They never believe us until the cameras roll. Mothers, daughters, nurses, teachers, lawyers, people from all walks of life resonated with her pain, not because they were shocked, but because they were tired. Tired of the silence. Tired of the invisibility. Tired of always having to explain their worth. News outlets began to call. Influencers reshared. A hashtag began trending. Hashtag Danielle deserves dignity. And suddenly, the very same store that had treated her like a suspect was on damage control. A statement was posted. "We deeply regret the experience Danielle had at our store. After reviewing our internal footage, we acknowledge that she did nothing wrong. We are taking steps to retrain staff and prevent such incidents in the future." But no mention of her name. No direct apology. Just corporate neutrality. But Danielle wasn't waiting on them anymore. Because something much greater had already happened. She had sparked a movement. A conversation that could no longer be buried under policies and PR statements. A reminder that the most dangerous thing about bias isn't just what it causes others to do. It's what it makes others assume without evidence. And the world, now watching, began to remember other names. Names like Sandra. Names like Brianna. Names that lived in hashtags and heartache. Danielle's voice became one of many. Not the first, not the last, but one that reignited a flame that had never truly gone out. She was invited to speak on podcasts, forums, and virtual panels. But in one interview, when asked what justice looked like to her, she didn't speak of lawsuits or headlines. She said quietly, "Justice looks like not having to prove I'm innocent every time I walk into a store." That one sentence, it echoed through the hearts of women everywhere. Because justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's just being able to exist without being questioned, to live without being watched, to breathe without apology. And as Danielle stood before audiences, both digital and physical, she didn't come as a victim. She came as a survivor, a teacher, a mirror. She showed people what it felt like to be profiled, not with statistics, but with lived experience. And slowly, the world leaned in closer. Because when the truth is spoken from the heart, it's impossible to ignore. A few days after the incident, someone unexpected reached out. It was the security guard, the same man who had followed Danielle, the same man whose silence had felt louder than the accusations themselves. His message was simple. "Can we talk? I saw the footage. I was wrong." Danielle hesitated. Why now? Why him? Did he want to clear his name or his conscience? After much thought, she agreed to meet in a neutral space with a friend by her side. When he walked in, he looked nothing like the figure she remembered. There was no badge, no walkie-talkie, just a man whose shoulders carried the weight of guilt. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood in front of her and said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I didn't trust what I saw. I trusted what I thought." Danielle was silent, not out of anger, but because for once, someone had said what so many refused to admit. He continued, "The way you looked at me that day, like you knew what was coming. I see that look in the footage now. It haunts me. I didn't say anything when I should have. I didn't protect you. And that's my failure." Danielle's friend gripped her hand. Tears filled Danielle's eyes, not because she forgave him, not yet, but because he finally saw her humanity. That was all she had ever wanted. To be seen, to be believed, to be treated like a person, not a threat. He offered to issue a public statement, to resign if it meant accountability, to do whatever it took to make it right. But Danielle looked at him and said, "This isn't about saving your job. This is about saving the next black woman from walking into a store and wondering if she'll make it out without a scar on her spirit." He nodded, and then he said something that would stay with her forever. "That day, I didn't see a person. I saw a profile. But your story made me see a sister, a daughter, a whole world in one woman. I'm sorry I forgot you were human. That apology didn't undo the damage, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall. Not all apologies come with justice. Not all guilt leads to change. But this one, it was honest. It was necessary. Because when accountability begins at the level of the individual, it creates a ripple strong enough to reach institutions. And Danielle? She didn't hug him. She didn't post about the meeting. She didn't forgive and forget. But she walked away a little lighter. Because something sacred had happened. The man who had once looked through her had finally looked at her. And that mattered. More than views. More than shares. It was a small piece of restoration in a world that often strips it away. The day the security camera footage was finally released, the world stopped for a moment. Danielle sat on her couch, hands shaking, heart pounding, surrounded by friends and family. And then play. The screen showed the store's clean aisles, the steady flow of customers, the quiet monotony of an ordinary day. Until Danielle entered. She walked in calm, confident. She smiled at a cashier. She greeted a child near the toys section. She picked up items one by one, checking prices, minding her business. Then came a moment. That woman, the one who had accused her, appeared. From another aisle, she looked directly at Danielle, paused, then walked toward the manager. Her lips moved, no audio, but her face spoke volumes. Whispers, a glance, a nod. Within seconds, the manager stiffened. The security guard looked up, and the atmosphere changed. All because of a lie. The camera kept rolling. Danielle moved to the counter, ready to pay. The manager stepped forward, stiff and cold. The security guard stood near the entrance. And then, the confrontation. The manager pointed at Danielle's bag. Danielle looked confused. She reached in, pulled out her own wallet. Her receipt. Still, they persisted. The video zoomed slightly. Danielle's face was clear now. Shocked, embarrassed, exposed. You could see it in her body language. Her dignity trying to stay upright while her heart broke beneath the surface. The footage showed everything. The fact that she had paid. The receipt. The absence of any stolen item. The shaky, unsure body language of the woman who had pointed the finger, now hiding behind shelves, avoiding eye contact. And finally, Danielle leaving the store, tears in her eyes, back straight, like a queen retreating from a battlefield where no one ever intended to honor her crown. The store was silent after she left. The cashier looked down, visibly shaken. A small child asked, "Why were they mean to that lady?" And no one could answer. The footage was undeniable, no matter how they tried to twist it, no matter how many times they claimed procedure, no matter what they said about miscommunication. The camera had captured what bias tried to bury. It didn't just record actions. It revealed intentions. The world reacted fast. Social media lit up. She was targeted. How many more black women need to be humiliated before people believe us? This is why we need cameras. Because our truth alone isn't enough. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows discussed the footage. Activists organized online support. And Danielle? She stayed quiet. Because even when the truth is finally out, the pain doesn't vanish. It lingers. It echoes. Yes, the footage vindicated her. But it also showed her, and the world, just how fragile dignity can be in the face of prejudice. She cried, not just for herself, but for every woman who never got her footage, who never had proof, who was erased in silence. And as she watched the comments, the shares, the rage building, she whispered one thing to herself. They see me now, but I needed them to believe me before they saw me. The truth was out. People had seen the footage. The world had reacted. And the store? They issued a statement. A cold, typed apology. We regret the incident and are committed to inclusivity and respect for all customers. The staff involved have been placed under review. Review? That's all. Danielle read those words, her hands trembling. Her soul had been ripped open in public, and they answered it with corporate buzzwords. No direct apology, no mention of her name, no emotional acknowledgement, just regret. She wasn't surprised, because when you've been wronged in plain sight, You learn that truth doesn't always come with justice or healing. Her inbox was flooded, some with love, some with "we stand with you," and many with hate. Maybe you look suspicious. Stop making it about race. You got your attention, now move on. Move on? As if the hurt could be folded neatly and tucked into a drawer. She couldn't walk into another store without scanning for cameras. She couldn't make eye contact with managers. She couldn't trust kindness, not even from strangers. Every smile felt suspicious. Every glance, a test. Because once you've been wrongly accused in front of the world, you never walk into a room the same way again. She tried to go back to work, but her coworkers treated her like a walking headline. Some were supportive. Others just watched her from the corners of the office, as if waiting to see what she'd do next. And the woman who made the false accusation? She stayed silent, never came forward, never apologized, protected by the same system that allowed her to weaponize her discomfort in the first place. Danielle didn't want revenge. She wanted something deeper, an end to the quiet permission society gives to those who think they're protecting something, when all they're doing is projecting fear onto innocent lives. She spoke at a local community center. With tears in her eyes and a mic in her hand, she said, "They believe the lie because of the skin I'm in. They watched me with suspicion instead of humanity. And when the truth came out, they treated it like an inconvenience. But I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to speak, because silence has never saved us." The crowd stood. Some cried. Some clapped with both hands and hearts. Danielle had become a voice, not because she wanted to, but because the world forced her to become one. It had been months since that fateful day. The memory of that humiliating moment was still fresh, but now it was no longer a scar. It had transformed into something greater. Danielle had learned the hardest lesson of her life. The world may misjudge you, label you, and even try to break you. But in the end, your strength is the one thing no one can take from you. Her life wasn't the same, but it was hers. She no longer had to prove herself to anyone. She didn't need the approval of strangers, and she certainly didn't need the validation of those who'd once stood silent in her pain. The truth had come out, yes, but more importantly, Danielle had found her voice. A voice that had been buried deep within her for years. A voice that now shouted louder than any accusation or judgment. And though her heart had been bruised, it was still beating with purpose. She found herself standing tall in places she had once felt small. She began to speak out, not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced, ignored, or wrongly accused. The stories poured in, the shared pain, the trauma, the broken pieces of lives shattered by one false accusation. And Danielle? She became their beacon of light, their symbol of hope. She turned the hurt into action. Her mission was clear, to create spaces where truth and justice were not afterthoughts, but foundational pillars. To build awareness, to educate, to fight for a world where fear of the other didn't dictate how people were treated. It was a long road ahead, but this was no longer about proving a point. This was about creating change. And as Danielle stood before a crowd, sharing her story one final time, the words that left her lips had power, not because of the injustice she faced, but because of the strength she had found in herself. "You could take my dignity, you could take my peace, but you will never take my truth, and you will never silence me." The crowd erupted into applause. Some cried, others stood in awe. Danielle had become more than just a survivor. She was now a leader. The security footage was only the beginning. But what came after, that was the real victory. Her voice would never be stilled again, and neither would the voices of all those who had been wronged.